5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX Podcast episode number 50. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I'm here today with you because we need to shake things up in the world of HR, talent acquisition, recruiting, company culture, in order to create positive employee experiences in our organizations. Your workplace doesn't have to be a dreadful place where employees feel disengaged. This podcast brings a different lens to the HR, employee engagement, and company culture conversation. We approach these topics from a brand and customer experience angle rather than a traditional HR angle. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to share best practices on the key elements that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create positive employee experiences. Not every company can do what Airbnb or Google do around their employee experience. And this is what this show is all about. Sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is Rachel Roman, Director of Talents, HR, and Culture at the startup called Updox. Today with Rachel, we will talk about how to create an effective employer brand. What are the key elements to attract and retain talent? How to increase your speed to hire and why it is critical to your business. And finally, how to measure the effectiveness of your talent acquisition strategy. This episode is brought to you by Fusion Alliance. Fusion Alliance delivers holistic solutions fusing together data, digital, and technology to redefine customer experiences and move your ideas to execution. That's why businesses across multiple industries have relied on Fusion's expertise and partnership for over 25 years. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Rachel. If you get a chance, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube. And last thing, if you want to send me feedback, suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at @EX_summit. All right, let's get right to it. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX Podcast. Very excited for today's guest, Rachel Roman. Rachel is calling from Columbus, Ohio, and she is the Director of Talents, HR, and Culture at a startup called Updox. Rachel, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here this morning.
So, very easy question to start the conversation today. Who you are you, and what is Updox?
Sure, absolutely. I'll share a little bit about me, and then I'll dive into Updox and what we're all about. So I'll start with myself. I grew up in Columbus. I went to University of Kentucky for school. I was a double major, actually focused on marketing in Spanish. And while I was in college, I worked at a marketing research firm for about $9.50 an hour and called people to engage with them for a variety of different user studies or opinion studies, and learned a lot about really how to engage with people. Before I graduated, I accepted an offer with PNC Bank in their Excel leadership program and was exposed to a variety of different HR items within a corporate rotational program. So that's really where I got my start. From an HR perspective, I was helping and assisting with a population of about 65,000 employees at that time. It was a large, fantastic company to work for. I really enjoyed my time at PNC, but something was missing. I really didn't know it at the time, but I started to make a huge shift into this world of technology and talent with a focus on employment branding and experience. And after I was at PNC, I went to a company local to Columbus Columbus. At the time, that was called Call Copy. I was a talent specialist when I joined, and shortly after joining, they rebranded to Uptivity. They were acquired rather by InContact, a company out in the Silicon Slopes of Utah. And from there, they were just acquired again. But we had a SaaS offering that enabled contact centers to operate more efficiently, increase the quality of customer interaction, ensure ongoing customer-centric business growth, improvement, all of that. I had the opportunity here to be exposed to an acquisition, really grow our employee population from a local office of about 150 to about 2,000 employees supporting an international force. And so it was a great experience. I got a lot of exposure. But what really caused me to make another shift after this was that the culture and employee experience changed drastically, largely by part of this merger. I felt as well like I had mastered my job and started to look for other challenges. From here, I started hearing in market in Columbus again about a VC-backed healthcare IT company called Crosschecks in Columbus, who at that time had raised about $15 million in Series B capital through Drive Capital and a few other well-respected VC firms in the Valley. And I joined them as a recruiter, became an employee engagement manager, and then became their human resources manager. Crosschecks was a fantastic example of employment branding and really telling an amazing story. And it caused me personally to want to join immediately. So I joined them. And then at that time, they were focused on using biometrics to identify patients within healthcare, link them back to their healthcare records, and cut down on duplicate medical records, fraud, prescription abuse, all of these things that you see in the market today. So it was a great experience. They were looking not only to grow their team, but to build out a best-in-class talent process and culture. So I had the ability to grow that team from about 30 to 110 employees. We did everything from establishing a talent process to framing out core values to building out an office to rolling out meaningful engagement and recognition. You name it, we did it here with little to no budget. And so it was a wild, amazing experience. It was a great time. But ultimately, I started to, again, hear in market about another company that I'm at today called Updox. So I joined Updox in 2017. At that time as well, a lot of buzz in the market. They had raised about a $12.7 million Series B private equity raise. And so I joined them as their talent manager, director of talent management, culture, all those things that you mentioned. And I've had the opportunity to grow our team from about 50 people from when I joined back in 2017 to about 106 that we have today. So it was a really exciting ride. There's still a lot going on that I'm really excited to share with you. But what does Updox do? We are today the industry leader for care coordination and customer relationship management solutions specific for healthcare providers and partners. So in essence, we simplify the business of healthcare. It's been fantastic. We have been named for the past 3 years on the Inc. 5000. So we're growing very quick and fast as a private company. And as a business as well, we've integrated with more than 100 electronic healthcare record companies, and we serve about 300,000 users and about 72 million patients. So it's a really exciting product. It's an exciting company. And through this kind of extensive direct messaging network and platform of apps, we connect all of these various healthcare providers, physicians, patients, payers, pharmacies, labs, you name it, healthcare partners, and bring them into this network so they can access a full suite of applications like secure messaging, patient portal, things like that. So it's exciting. It's a fantastic company to be at. And like I mentioned, that's a little bit about what I've done historically, what I'm doing today, and a little bit more about Updox.
So what's interesting, you've been in the tech space for quite some time, and I would say that the technology sector is probably a bit more receptive to the waves of change that are coming to the organizations in terms of company culture, talent acquisition, employee branding, the evolution of human resources. And obviously the war on talent is fierce and super competitive, especially in the tech world. And now companies have to think of themselves more as employment brands in order to attract and retain their talents. So can you share with us some of the things that you've learned, not only at Updox, but in other companies as well, and how do you create and curate an effective employer brand?
Absolutely. And that is a great point and a great question. So I can share a little bit about my experience there and how I've done it at Updox and other organizations. As you mentioned, employer branding is so critical in order to stay competitive and win the war on talent. And it's even more competitive when you think about this high growth tech space that we're sitting in. So generally, how I get started when creating an effective employer brand, I tend to always start with the situational analysis and really define my objective. So for this purpose, as we're talking, let's just say, of course, the objective is to attract and retain talent. So then, in order to do that, we must understand the employer brand that we have today. And as well, we really need to look at any enhancement opportunities that we have to strengthen our brand and really, frankly, elevate ourselves against the competition. So that's kind of how I start and focus. And then in that same thought as well, companies at different stages have different objectives around that branding and experience. But again, let's draw into just that overall objective of attracting and retaining talent. The importance, regardless of what stage your company is in, remains the same. Messaging and branding can change. You need to navigate that change, and you need to keep that scalability top of mind. But let's dive into, again, how we get started. And oftentimes, for me at least, this takes place with a SWOT analysis. So hopefully that's not a new term. Hopefully that's something you leverage in your day-to-day. But that is really diving into the strengths of your employer brand today and your company, frankly, as well. The weaknesses that perhaps you guys have too, opportunities. There's always opportunities to improve on that brand and that messaging. And then, of course, you really want to be aware of the threats. And oftentimes that are other companies, that are just as attractive or offer perhaps the same things that your company does. So you need to really focus on that. You need to understand your brand today. And largely that starts with, what's the story? Every company has a story about how they got started, where they are today. You need to understand and be able to really articulate that story as if it was almost an elevator pitch. So as you engage with people, you can really tell them the what and what's going on in your company and your employer brand. So it's kind of interesting to get started in that way. If you have some opportunities to improve, again, you need to understand them as you're doing this analysis. You want to look at that how. It's incredibly important. You need to understand as well, what are we doing today? How are we getting that messaging out? And how do we really position ourselves in the market and really own our brand? And that typically comes with me, and a lot of the success that I've seen in this has been with telling an authentic story about your brand and really showcasing your brand personality, oftentimes through recognizing the emotional power of content. This allows you to connect with your target audience and really motivate them to want to find out more about your company. Inevitably, you want them to be a part of your company. You want them to be drawn to your mission, apply for positions, and want to engage in your talent process with the eventual goal of course, joining your company, or if nothing else, evangelizing about your company. Hey, that seems like a great place to work. They have a great product and their people seem pretty happy with what they're doing. So that is absolutely critical. I always liken it back to, and this is an easy way to think about it as well, you personally have been drawn to certain brands before as a consumer, right? These companies as well have compelling content that tells you a story that's largely rooted in experience, whether it's the customer, of course, the employee, or as a business. So that's something that's incredibly important as you get started. And then once you understand the objective and the how, it's time to focus on the who. Who is that target candidate? What's their profile? Sometimes in the past, I've made assumptions about people that we needed to bring on board, but it's critical for organizations to understand and constantly evaluate because it's not stagnant. Oftentimes it can change, and in fact does change quite frequently. So for example, target candidate profiles might shift. you might need a different person or profile to tackle a sales role within your organization successfully than, of course, you would for, say, a software engineer or someone with a technical capacity. So you need to understand who is that right profile for the right role. You need to explicitly share as well what it takes to be successful in your company, largely through a well-articulated job description, and then sprinkling on top your branding and brand story. And then the messaging and branding should also evolve. So in addition to understanding that, kind of the how and where we get started, you need to understand the who and really focus on the who. And that's where the results tend to happen. But I would say as well, once you understand that, something that is absolutely critical for success is really understanding that candidate journey. And it's different for each company. You need to have that branding in place prior to curate that proper experience. Things that come to mind as you tell your story and create a great candidate experience are sharing items like your company's awards and accolades. Let them speak for you. Are you, for example, a best place to work? Is your company a high growth stage company of the year? These awards will set expectations for your candidate about their experience, the journey, and ultimately your authentic company brand. You additionally also want to have management visibility in addition to those awards and accolades and really talking about your experience. You should be able to know, and candidates should be able to know through the process, who are the leaders in your company, who are really devising that strategy and that pragmatic vision of what's going on, and they need to tell the story as well. You should ultimately always be proud of the senior leaders you have in your company, and employee stories can also be effective in sharing a little bit more about that candidate journey and giving them a true glimpse into, what's this brand and what's this employer all about ultimately before I join. So it's interesting how you kind of think through those items. And ultimately, once you understand that, you need to start understanding and evaluating some of the sites and assets and tools that you're going to use to get your story out there, your messaging out there, and help navigate that experience. So from an employer branding perspective, and keeping that experience top of mind, of course, you should leverage a few different channels. So I can kind of dive into perhaps a few critical areas to focus on and kind of invest that talent acquisition dollar and messaging into, outside of, kind of devising that strategy too. So mainly when I have my SWOT analysis done and I kind of understand the objective, the how, the who, have my candidate journey in place, I'm constantly focused on how do we get that messaging out there? How do we evangelize more about our experience and story and get people fired up about what we're doing? So I always dive into critical places to spend your dollars and channels to look into for you to tell your story and attract both active and passive candidates. I think attracting passive folks, people that are happy or relatively happy in their jobs today, is the biggest avenue to grow your employer brand and continue to bring on the best and brightest. So from a job board perspective or job utilization site perspective, I've used, and there's no secret here, these are typical sites that I'm sure most of you have put some dollars to in the past. I typically use Indeed, of course. I use it on a free perspective. I also put some critical dollars to campaigns as well. LinkedIn, of course, is a fantastic site. It's geared more towards professional folks, so keep that in mind too, depending on the demographic you go for. Stack Overflow is a fantastic resource. That's something that's largely geared more towards technical individuals. And then Google Job Ads and Facebook Job Campaigns are two newer sources that just get that messaging out there as well. So Google Job Ads populate as you look through a Google search. Facebook Job Campaigns are largely through the employer page that they have today, and it just kind of shows more opportunities within that business. Those are two newer avenues. And then two legacy sites that I also tend to leverage today are Dice, which is a technical asset, and AngelList, which is more geared towards startup environment, but is a free resource. So those are some avenues to really look into and tell your story and get people to come to you. Of course, as well, you have your job site or your careers portal within your company website today, which is typically a great avenue as well to showcase how are you growing, what's out there, and what's expected. So that's a lot to dive into. The last point I'd like to share, just to make sure that you're putting together an effective strategy and really executing on the items that are important that you've kind of shared above, it's critical to benchmark and measure success. You have to turn data into knowledge and then ultimately turn that into action. So again, you need to really understand, what are these best sources of talent? Is it coming from one of these channels? Is there a best channel for talent? Perhaps it's LinkedIn. Perhaps it's referrals. There must be an understanding of these candidate statistics, these conversion rates. So for example, how many candidates do you need to apply or interview before you can extend an offer for the organization? What's that speed? You really need to understand how these people are moving through the process, where you're getting them from, and how long it really takes for you to make action or make a hire for that role that's open. So that's a lot to kind of dive into. Hopefully that will get you guys started or kind of thinking more about that branding for now. So hopefully that's pretty helpful. I think that's what I would share around how you curate an effective employer brand today.
When you look at the SWOT analysis, who are the main stakeholders that you bring together to sort of build that foundation? Obviously, when you're a startup, it's a smaller size of a company to be able to bring people together, but you've been in larger companies as well. So who are the key people or functions that you bring together to go through that SWOT analysis and define what that employer brand message is going to be and what the employee value proposition is?
Absolutely, absolutely. And really, when you go through that SWOT analysis, and depending on your organizational size, you're going to want to bring those senior leaders, oftentimes by title, those C-level executives to the table, as well as those VPs or those leaders of the divisions, to come together and say, what are we thinking around? What are our strengths? What are the weaknesses and opportunities and threats? It almost has to be at that level so that you can, from there, roll down the findings and really kind of, engage other individuals after that has already been worked through. So typically I'll call to the table C-level folks, VPs within the organization, and then as well, I lean heavily on my internal marketing team. So once we have or think that we understand the strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and then go into getting that employer brand message together, I always leverage our marketing team because typically they know a little bit more about how to push it out there as well and kind of can play a little bit with the messaging and kind of A/B test a little bit too, which I think is critical. So I will then lean on my marketing team to then get that out there and really as well, and I would say maybe even in that step or after that step, would engage with the remainder of the team, associates, managers, things like that, to really understand, is this the message that resonates with you? Did you feel this through the process? And then from there, we're able to establish that employee value proposition. We've done a lot of the legwork and the analysis and have got the messaging out there. And then we leverage them to say, is that your authentic, true experience? Do you feel like and get that buy-in from them for, that employee value proposition? So that's typically how I would tackle that. And that's what I've done in larger corporate organizations. And that's what I've done in some of the startups that I've worked with as well.
Yeah, because you mentioned earlier that it has to be genuine. Those stories have to be genuine and authentic, right? Because there's always the issue between the perceived employer brands or proposition and the reality of it. There's something that's the CEO, the leaders may think that this company or their culture is about, and the reality is a little different.
Oh yeah, I've seen that too.
So how do you make sure? Have you faced a situation where you had some directions from the leadership on where exactly they wanted to go, but then going deeper into the exercise, you realized that some of the things they were claiming about the culture didn't really translate into what employees were feeling on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've seen that happen before, and we typically will lean on the data. So constantly, I'm trying to think, it was another organization that I had worked for. We had a bunch of very explicit cultural core values that we pushed out to our employees. Some of them were things like excuses are for losers and put the skunk on the table and things like that. So they were very in your face. They were very well thought out. They were very explicit, and they held people accountable. As we rolled that out, we found that senior leadership, oftentimes, although they were, sharing this mantra, sharing these values, they weren't necessarily living by the same values and standards that the rest of the employees were to live by as well. And so that can then create a very kind of divisive or division within the culture that you need to come back to the table and say, is this what we're really all about? Is this something we need to change from a messaging perspective? Or is this something that we need to look at leadership and make some changes as well? So you constantly need to go to the employees, go back to leadership, and understand, are we saying what we truly mean, what we're truly doing? And if the answer is no, then we need to come back to the table and think about what is right for us. So that's typically what I've seen in the past. And there's, some fine tuning to really get it right.
And one key success factor is not only to have, to leverage job boards and the career page on the website to be able to tell the story, but also to rely on what we call the brand ambassadors, who are the employees themselves of the company, to be able to share their work stories and passion on their own social channels. Right.
Oh yeah.
So how do you build momentum within the employees when you're ready to launch a new employer brand campaign, for instance? How do you build that momentum internally to get employees passionate about sharing their stories?
Absolutely, absolutely. And typically, when that happens and how we kind of capture that experience and eventually roll it out to market or share externally what's going on, we tend to meet internally and understand a little bit about who are our biggest advocates, within the organization, who are folks within the organization that frankly have a really compelling story to tell. And oftentimes those are potentially legacy individuals that have come in and made a huge impact and have now taken on really senior roles, or we've carved out roles for them as an organization due to their skill set. And so we tend to capture their experience by really interviewing them and, again, understanding the why. What gets you excited about work? Is it, the mission that we're doing day in and day out? Is it the environment that we have here? Is it the upward mobility and momentum that you're able to really make an impact? We meet with them. We understand the what. We almost approach it as like a white paper, if you will, so that we have it documented and continue to parse and use that story for scalability. And then as well, we often go to our employees and say, if you are a big champion of Updox, are you willing to share about your experience online? So we'll typically kick that out to stories on LinkedIn or a short snippet about the why they joined Updox on Twitter, or sharing that on our careers page. And then also a great tool that I forgot to mention earlier, which is a great avenue to bring and share that story, is typically Glassdoor is a great place for employees to anonymously, if they wish, and confidentially, if they wish, share about their experience for better or for worse, so that we can continue to understand that genuine experience and build on any opportunities we have if we've ever fallen flat in that experience. So it's very interesting how we approach it.
Once you have that employer brand story or stories available, and you have all the social channels, and you have a fully marketing plan in place, and you have built that momentum within the employees so that they can share their stories as well. The key is, what's going to be the impact on the recruiting process,
yes.
right? And obviously, as we discussed earlier, competition is really tough between companies locally and even globally. And the key thing is the speed to hire. It's not only just to have a great brand out there, but how quick can you get people in the door, or qualified candidates in the door. So what are some of your tips to not only accelerate the hiring process, but also to measure the impact and the progress done on this?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And speed to hire is critical. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a stellar candidate and we have really delayed our process or not been quick enough to get them in the door. And it's something that you need to manage. So after you have all those items in place, like you mentioned, you understand that you're telling the right story, you're finding the talent, you need to manage that speed to hire, like you mentioned. So typically I'll look at what channel these folks are coming from. Is it the company website? Is it Indeed or perhaps Dice? You need to know those sources that can assist immensely with that speed to hire if you know those channels. So once you kind of know that, I go into, where the candidates have previously worked or where they're coming from. Perhaps there's an industry focus that's well suited for your company. Perhaps there's a current or previous company that has been a great source of candidates. You need to know where they're coming from so that you can find them first. So managing speed to hire is really about finding, again, the right people through those items that hopefully you're putting in place based on the framework that I shared earlier. I think something that I found specifically in managing speed to hire, and I'll talk to some of the metrics like you mentioned and some best practices there, but something that I think is a huge, huge advantage is understanding the market shifts within here where I serve, Columbus, and kind of making your move there as well. So for example, at Updox in 2017 in Q2, we needed to hire several sales folks very quickly. So I watched the market trends and leveraged a big layoff at Spectrum. Time Warner formerly was their name. Put together a robust referral network to fuel my pipeline and found some amazingly talented people who are our highest performers here today. Another example, last month, Battelle locally laid off about 300 workers, both technical and otherwise, and we snapped up a few talented engineers. Today, or yesterday rather, I found out that Express Scripts is losing about 400 people. So you're always trying to understand the market, engage with exiting talent, and that lets you kind of fuel and really kick up that cadence and speed to hire, which is incredibly important. So once you've found them, you need to ensure that the process is right and you have that right cadence to hire. So best practice that I typically share around speed to hire is 20 days or less. And that is from that initial touch to them having an offer. And it can ultimately slow during, shorter recruiting cycles. And so I have gone on the low end or kind of lag end of about 26 days. But we typically operate, and I have operated in all those organizations, at about 20 days to hire. So that allows applicants to move through the process quickly. And then the cadence that I suggest to ensure that not only you're moving quickly, but that you're putting the right steps in place to have an objective process would really be having that new applicant apply or being sourced by one of those channels that I mentioned. Recruiter reaches out, has a phone screen. I suggest having some sort of assessment or project, putting their skills in a working fashion. And then from there, an on-site interview with the hiring manager, a final team interview, reference check, offer letter. And you might say, well, that's a lot to do in 20 days. But, you need to understand as well, and this is playing to the metrics, how many qualified applicants have to go through each stage of your process to predict that timeline to hire. Yeah, and for you to kind of manage that process. So you need to understand what that volume is so that you can increase or perhaps decrease your speed to hire and really manage that pipeline effectively. So that's how I typically tend to accelerate that plan or decelerate if needed. And then something else that I couple within it is just having really crisp feedback forms and an established service level with the individuals that I'm working with in the organization as well. So if we're going to move this quickly, I need everyone's buy-in and feedback in a timely manner. I need that feedback to be objective and to follow the process that we've set forth so that we can move in that quick cadence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and obviously there are some elements that as a recruiter you can control and others where you don't have as much control, such as the availability of the hiring manager to be able to set up in an interview with qualified candidates. So how do you make them be accountable for those specific milestones to reach within those 20 days or so that it doesn't delay the whole process and it increases your chances to actually recruit the candidates that you are looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've played around with this and toggled with this at every organization that I've worked in. And so, keeping that accountability is huge because that plays to that speed and that quickness to hire. And so you're exactly right. A lot of these individuals that are tasked with interviewing are typically managers, are typically, directors or VPs of a specific, piece of the organization. We, as we grow, hold them just as accountable and say, you are responsible for product or marketing, but you are equally as responsible for growing your team and bringing on new talent. So you have to set that standard up front, and then you have to set as well those service level agreements. So for engineering, they're allowed to give feedback in 2 to 3 days. For sales, because that skill set moves quicker, it's a day. And then after that, we have to get serious about getting other people involved or getting additional feedback from other managers. If that first individual cannot provide. So we constantly have service level to increase that accountability. And then we also have kind of a secondary subset of individuals who can jump in if, say, scheduling just becomes too crazy or they can't be there. So we have some kind of backup plans as well. But I think to increase that success and ultimately play into that speed to hire and getting those right candidates in the door, everyone has to know up front that everyone's involvement is absolutely critical in this process to get the right talent in the door. And I think if you set that expectation, managers really, take on that responsibility and some, because it's not only their team, it's going to be their people that inevitably will, as the pace that we grow, will run the organization at some point. So just putting in that accountability at the beginning and setting that expectation typically affords way more success throughout the process, I've found.
Is there a way, in your opinion, to track the level of commitment for those managers? Do you think that we should put in place metrics around recruiting the same way they have metrics around business performance, revenue generation, whatever it might be, or quality if it's on the engineering side? Do you think that organizations actually should look at putting in place some metrics so that they are accountable for delivering what they're supposed to do on the hiring side?
Absolutely. I think, it has to be right for that, specific organization, but it's something that is just as critical as some of these opportunities that we look at as revenue bearing. People are often our, biggest asset in many ways. And so we need to make sure that we're accountable and tracking that level of commitment from a hiring perspective. So our hiring managers today are constantly looking at, for their perspective and their kind of metrics of success, what are our days to hire? How much time does it take from the day that they hand me a new requisition to when that offer is out? And do we make sure that we're meeting that goal? And then as well, timing to feedback. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've found in most organizations that can really delay a process. You don't get that critical feedback. You have to go searching around for that manager. And then when you find them, oh yeah, I loved that person. Or alternatively, no, they were terrible. And so that can really stall it or curb your process. And so I would say having that days to hire and that expectation and that timing to feedback will really increase that commitment and ultimately that accountability so you're getting the right people.
So we talked about getting job seekers and candidates in the door and then through the recruiting funnel. Now, obviously, there are many candidates for one position or a few positions. And one key elements in recruiting is to build your talent pool over time, right? Because obviously you may just have limited job openings, but you still want to engage with very good candidates, even though they may not have been the right fit right away. So what are some of the tips that you have that you may want to share about nurturing your talent pool and keep that engagement going on a regular basis?
Absolutely. I think that's, hugely, hugely important. I know specific to Updox, that's been a huge advantage for us as we have made pivots in the business and have had to bring on folks that, maybe to plan we hadn't, thought about, but then ultimately needed based on business need. And so how we've engaged with that kind of passive qualified talent pool that maybe at the time we just didn't have a position for that was open, we really archive and nurture them by just continuing to engage them. So I typically will touch, really interesting candidates about once a quarter, and I set that expectation with them. So it's not too frequent to where, we're leading them along or anything like that, but just always checking in and saying, hey, how's it going? Things are still great at Updox. And then as well, I would also suggest engaging them with other individuals in the organization. So I work with a lot of smart people here, and I constantly am making introductions to these other smart candidates just so that they can get to know us better, get to know the culture better, get to know other people in the organization. So when that time comes that we want to bring them on board, we have their buy-in. They've been exposed to a lot of different people in the process, and we're able to keep that, really quick speed to hire as well. And so that's probably best practice that I've seen. And a lot of that can be done outside of the office. So that's grabbing coffee with these individuals. If you're inclined, that's grabbing a happy hour drink with them. It's constantly staying in touch with those people that are eventually going to make the biggest difference to your bottom line. And it's hard to do. It's tough to network at that rate and meet these goals internally. But when it comes time in that critical moment to, tap that, incredibly passive person on the shoulder, that's how I found that success. It's just keeping that relationship really fresh and really nurturing that individual.
So you work for a tech startup. So obviously technology is at the core of your company's business. And technology plays now more than ever a very important role in terms of automation of the processes, customization of the experiences. How do you see technology impacting the way organizations are managing talent acquisition and attraction and nurturing that talent pool? Do you see more and more customization of even the candidate experience based on different backgrounds?
Yeah, I've seen that before too. It's interesting. I use automation today to do a lot of my mundane tasks. So a lot of templates in terms of responding and getting folks scheduled. I use an automated scheduling suite, things like that to, navigate through the process and keep that messaging crisp and consistent for, most of our roles. But I'll tell you from a customization perspective and really impacting and managing some of those, candidates, we have, gone differently outside of our process for, more senior, custom, high target roles to make sure that the candidate has a little bit something different, rolling out the red carpet for them. But I would say customization is something that I think is a case-by-case basis. I like to be, when we can, as uniform and as possible to ensure that, each candidate has the same experience in that way. But I think it's an interesting trend, and I think it's certainly something that will make a big difference in the space that we serve.
Do you guys get feedback from candidates about what their experience was about?
That's a good question. We have played around with feedback surveys. So, as they go through the process, kind of getting a feel for what we're doing great and what maybe we need to work on. We are playing with now what the right place to really ask that is. Is it after a phone screen? Is it after they've been on site and maybe have been declined? We welcome all of that feedback, of course, on Glassdoor. Of course, that's that site that they can just drop in and share, whatever that was. And so we're playing around with it, as something that's initiated by us, but I'm interested in kind of playing with what's the best time to get that feedback so it's beneficial and will help us, continue to build in that way. So it's something we're interested in but haven't executed yet, if that makes sense.
Well, so you have 106 employees at Updox. Are they all local, or do you have remote people as well?
That's a great question, and this is a really hot topic here as well. So of that 106, we have one individual who is located in Georgia, and the rest of us are here in our new office in Bridge Park in Dublin. And so a lot of our individuals here are local, and we do have, telecommuting for, local folks, so people can work from home. We have some flexibility there so that they can do what they do best and get, what they need done. We are playing around with, and I've read a lot of articles recently about how to really have a fantastic and engaged remote force, because truly at some point we're going to max the market in terms of talent, and we want to get ahead of that to ensure that we're continually not limited by barriers like where people are located in terms of how they work. And so that's something that we're starting to build up now. How we're preparing for a remote force is largely by putting a lot of technology in place to ensure that those folks can remote in and get the information that they need to be successful from us here. But to answer your question, of that, kind of piece of our staff, we have one individual out of 106 that's not here.
All right. Because I would say that part of the talent acquisition strategy as well is to be able to put in place some processes and frameworks that if you can't find the right talents locally, you may have to look at other places or consider remote work as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's something to consider, and I think it's something that, we're a little bit behind on right now, but we're looking to navigate here soon.
So we're getting close to the end of the conversation today. So before we conclude the episode today, let me ask you some fun questions first.
Okay.
If you were to invite someone famous to dinner, who would you pick and why?
Okay, I think I would pick Steve Jobs. I thought a little bit about this. He is this prolific American entrepreneur, business magnate, inventor, industrial engineer. And I would love, although he's not here today, to just pick his brain about how he organized his creativity, his thoughts, and put it into action. And of course, I deeply respect the company he created and still find myself incredibly inspired by him daily. So I would love to have dinner with him, if possible.
If you were to recommend a business book or even a non-business book, which one would it be?
Absolutely. A book that I've read before and have engaged with again recently is Top Grading. And this is a book by Bradford D. Smart. It's really showing how leading companies win by hiring, coaching, and keeping the best people. So it puts some science behind really how to grow, if that makes sense. So Top Grading is something that's on my desk right now.
What's your favorite vacation spot?
Yeah, good question. I think my favorite vacation spot is Europe, anywhere in Europe. But if I had to pick a specific city or town, I would pick Mallorca, Spain.
Oh, that's quite unusual. Why Mallorca?
I spent some time in Madrid when I was finishing up my Spanish degree, and then got to go down and hang out on the beach for a little bit. And then I never wanted to come back. So I had a blast there, and I would love to go back.
Okay, well, maybe your favorite food is Spanish. So what is your favorite food?
I'm going to throw it off here, though. My favorite food is bread. Any bread will do. My friends and I started an online community. It's a private Facebook group with about 3,000 members called Bread. And we just post about bread and share recipes. Never met a bread I don't like.
What type of bread do you like the most, then?
I think I like a rye. I don't know. Don't make me choose. A croissant even? I don't know. Anything, truthfully.
All right. And last question. If you were to go on a deserted island, what would be the 3 essential items that you will take with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would have to take sunscreen if it's an island, some way to play music. I would have to have some form of entertainment, so that would come by music. And then I would have to have something to write with and something to write on. So I would want to, really be able to be creative while I'm on a deserted island, if that makes sense.
What is the way for our listeners to follow you and Updox on social media?
Yeah, good question. So social media, you can find me on LinkedIn. And then for Updox, you can find Updox on LinkedIn, Facebook, and then updox.com for more information.
All right. And we'll share all of those in the podcast notes as well. Any last
Great.
word of wisdom or advice?
I would really say, and this is something I've lived by, take risks, push yourself, connect with others, be very genuine, always learn something new, and always be, trying or willing to try something new. So this is my first podcast. I've had an amazing experience with you, and I really hope you enjoyed my insights as well.
Awesome. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed it, and let's do this again soon. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.